Today on the bench I have a couple of shortwave receivers that I picked up at a flea market a few months ago. So I'm going to go through some of the features on both of these radios and sort of just compare them to one another to kind of point out the strengths and weaknesses of each radio. Both of these radios are portable and can be run off of D-cell batteries, but they can also be plugged into and run off of AC line voltage. I'm going to start off by looking at the Panasonic RF-2600 first. First and most obvious, this radio is much bigger than the other radio. It also has more features and controls on it than the other radio. The most noteworthy control that this radio has that the other radio does not have is the digital frequency display that you can see over here. You could turn that on, tune to the station that you want to tune to, get everything set, and then turn that off to conserve the battery power. Now the radio also has a backlight up here, although it is kind of weak. You can kind of see it there when I turn it on and off. It's there, but it is weak. So over here is the band selector. Now this radio has 6 different bands that can be selected. The other radio only has 5 bands on its band selector, and then a CB radio sort of sub-band. So it's really maybe 5.5. Even though the other radio has less bands in its band control, it can actually tune a greater frequency range than this radio can. Both radios have a BFO switch that can be turned on and off so that the radios can receive sideband. Now this radio has an extra sort of calibration knob, they call it, but it kind of works as a fine-tuning control. It also has a BFO pitch, which is kind of nice. So you can kind of use these two controls in conjunction to really dial in either sideband or Morse code communications. The other radio only has one sort of fine-tuning control. This radio also has an RF gain control that works on AM and shortwave bands. It doesn't work on the FM band. This radio also has separate bass and treble controls, which the other radio also has, and then one nice large volume control, which of course the other radio also has as well. Up here, this radio has a signal meter, which is helpful for tuning in weak stations. And then here's the analog frequency dial. It is sort of a barrel that rotates as I tune the radio. And then of course the radio also has a built-in telescoping antenna. Now this one's a little bit screwed up in so much as that I can't push it any further down than what it's at now. And you can also see that the tip is broken off and missing. Now just a quick look at the back of the radio. You can see here there's a couple of antenna clips for attaching wires for external antennas here. Here's another look at the telescoping antenna. And then here is the battery compartment. And you can see that this radio takes 6 D-sized batteries, which are falling out at the moment. It takes 6 D-sized batteries. There's a little compartment for an earphone. There's no earphone in here right now. Over here is a receptacle for an AC power cord that you can plug in here and then plug the power cord into a standard 120 volt electrical outlet. So now I'll take a look at the RF-1100. So at first glance you can see that this radio is much smaller than the other radio. So up here is a light switch that'll turn on a backlight behind the dial and the signal meter, I think. Just like the other radio, the light is very weak and doesn't do a whole lot when there's full light in the room. This, of course, is the power switch. Here is a signal strength indicator. Over here next to the tuning dial is a DX or local switch, which kind of puts in, I guess, an attenuator, if you want to call it that. And then when in FM mode, this turns on or off the AFC control. Over here is the tuning dial, and you can kind of see there's a line in the plastic here, and the background moves when the radio is tuned. Now, unlike the other radio that has a cylinder that rotates, this one is almost like a scroll. I think there's sort of a cylinder down here out of sight and another one up here, and this is kind of on a continuous loop, almost like a treads on a tank or a bulldozer or something. What the effect of that is that it keeps the frequency display flat against the plastic, and in my opinion makes it a little bit easier to read than the other radio. This unit's telescoping antenna is in excellent shape. It's not missing the top piece like the other one is, and it retracts completely into the radio when not in use. This radio's tuning control is over here on the side. Down here is a fine tuning control that's helpful for tuning in shortwave stations or weak stations. Now, an interesting feature that this radio has that the other radio doesn't is it has this 120-minute timer. So I can turn this timer anywhere between 0 and 120, and I can have the radio either automatically turn off after the time has expired or turn on after the time has expired. So that's kind of an interesting feature. You don't see that on too many portable radios like this. You'd expect to see that more on a bedside radio or something. So up here is the band switch. Now, as I sort of alluded to previously, this radio has 5 bands that can be selected, and then it has this CB subband that can be turned on when in the shortwave 2 band. So if it's in any of these other bands, this switch doesn't do anything. But if you're in the shortwave 2 band and turn this on, then you can tune around and receive CB radio activity. Just like the other radio, this one has a BFO that can be switched on or off. Now, it doesn't have the BFO pitch control, but the pitch and sort of fine-tuning can be controlled using the fine-tuning knob on the side over here. And then over here are the bass and treble controls and the main volume control. On this side of the radio, you can see there's an MPX out, what they call a rhythm in or a record out jack. And this is the one that I found that if I connect a smartphone or an iPod or something like that, I can play music through the internal speaker, with the external device connected. And then here, this jack is for a external speaker, 8 ohms. Now, just like on the other radio, this one has 2 terminals for an external antenna. However, these are just standard screw terminals. They're not the fancy spring clips like the other one has. This radio also has a receptacle for an AC power cord. This radio also runs on batteries, and this battery compartment can be removed by activating this clip at the bottom, bringing this out of the way, and you can see that this radio only requires 4 D-size batteries to run, whereas the other radio needed 6. Now, this radio has its original earphone kind of jammed in here too as well. The other one on the other radio was missing, but this one is still here, which is kind of interesting. And then here's a look at the side of the radio that has the main tuning control that you can see here. Here is the fine tuning control, and then down here, this control is the timer that I talked about earlier. And then up on top of the radio here is this interesting rotatable ferrite antenna that's sort of enclosed in this plastic case. This can be rotated back and forth through about 180 degrees of rotation, and you can see it kind of can fold back down into the radio body as well. So this is kind of neat. I think it's sort of a gimmick. I mean, you can turn this thing to sort of aim it towards the station, but this isn't really a large radio. You could just simply turn the radio if you wanted to too. But it is kind of a nice mechanism, and a lot of time and effort went into this thing. You can kind of hear it. It's got sort of a ratchet mechanism in there that makes it run real smooth, and I wouldn't say it locks into place, but it kind of helps keep it from moving freely so that you wouldn't bump it easily if this thing were being used out in the field. So I've got both radios side by side here, and I want to point out one more difference between these 2 radios before I do some band scanning here with both of them. Now, for the purposes of this comparison that I'm about to do, I've got both radios tuned to 91.7 FM, which is WHUS, the University of Connecticut radio station. That station happens to be the closest to this location and works real well down here in the cellar without antennas extended. So the point of comparison that I want to make right now is that despite the fact that this radio is almost twice the size of this radio actually has a better sound. So I'm not sure if the sound quality is really going to translate all that well through the camera microphone, but I'll give it a shot. So first I'll start with the RF-2600.
And Kent and Vasey have both fouled out. Here's Harris, the best three-point shooter on the team, but you wouldn't know it by that shot. Air ball.
And now I'll turn up the RF-1150. Now, one word to note, this radio, the controls are a little bit scratchy on this one, so you may hear a little bit of scratch, and I may have to fool with the control a little bit to get that to go away.
Really, see if UConn will beat itself from the line, really, but the three-point shooting has just not come through for this two-lane side. They've hit 4, but almost all of them.
Okay, now I'm going to do sort of a, turn these up real quick side by side so you can get a quicker compare.
Most of them have been pretty good looks, too. I mean, these aren't like chucking them up. And these are pretty open looks. And I mean, kind of the separation from two teams that aren't playing that great to, you know, top 5 teams are knocking down all these shots.
Purvis hits both free throws.
He has 12.
Okay, so again, I'm not sure if that translated through the camera or not. Now, this radio doesn't sound bad, but for whatever reason, it just does not have the low-end punch that this radio has. I think this radio, at the end of the day, probably has a little bit more volume than this one may have, just simply because this is running off of 6 batteries and this one's only running off of 4. However, the quality of the sound in this one, for some reason, is just better. It's got more frequency response down low, and I think is a little bit easier to listen to for a longer period of time. Now, it surprises me a little bit that the smaller radio has what I consider the better or fuller sound, but it could be just a choice of speaker, or even the shape of the case may have something to do with it. I'm not really sure. Okay, so now that I've compared the sound quality of the two radios, I'm going to tune around a little bit and just kind of demonstrate how these radios operate. So we already heard what a relatively strong FM station sounds like. So I've now tuned to a weaker station, 103.7. I think this is WEEI out of Providence, Rhode Island. That's, I don't know, 50 or 60 miles east of here, give or take. Maybe it's a little more, I'm not sure. This station comes in at this location without too much trouble, but down here in the cellar, it's a little bit of a fringe station. So let's see what these radios sound like here. First, I'll do the 2600.
And college grads as much as $750 off. Tax season is here, and Antonino Acura is ready with 75 pre-owned vehicles starting as low as $5,000. It's the all-wheel drive event at Antonino Acura, Route 184 in Rockland. AntoninoAcura.com.
Good. There's nothing wrong with it, per se. Good clocks in.
So there's the 2600.
Fine being complacent. But why stop at good when you could have better? Like a car that can help keep you safe. Wouldn't a car that can help prevent one altogether be better? At Hyundai, better drives us. It's what you'll find in our cars and SUVs. Better keeps an eye out for you with available blind spot detection. Better alerts you when you're not so alert. Thanks.
So as you heard, this station, 103.7, was, I don't know, maybe about 50% quieting on this radio. There was some sort of white noise in the background. The station was definitely usable, but there was a little bit of noise on the signal. This one over here seemed to be picking the station up quite a bit better. Now, that could just simply be the way the antennas are oriented down here in the cellar. It may not be necessarily an indicator of which radio is better. FM is very finicky about, antenna positions and that sort of thing. So it could simply just be that. But for this particular station, the way these radios are oriented, this one was doing a lot better job pulling it in than this one was. I'm going to try one more FM station just to see what happens. This is 107.3 WAAF, which serves Boston. And Boston is, I don't know, 70 or 80 miles northeast of here. Now, I'm not exactly sure where this station transmits from. Could be anywhere around the Boston area. So the transmitters could be further away than that, or it could be closer. I'm not really sure. I know that at one point in time, back in the 90s, this station used to be real strong here. But something changed at one point, and now we can't get it too well here in northern Connecticut. So they must have changed their radiation pattern at one point in the past. So. So on the 2600, you could kind of hear some noise in the background, and I believe that noise is coming from my wireless router. As you heard, when I moved the antenna around, the signal got a little bit stronger, but was still pretty much in the fringe, in the background there. So now we'll try the 1150.
Takes over with the trusted dentist. And that's why when you sit down the show, you should have better friends than the doctors at Affinity. Affinity does accept most insurances.
So again, on this radio, you could hear that the station was coming in better. Now I lost it to the wireless router noise when I moved the antenna a certain way, but then when I moved it back, it came back in strong again. So, again, maybe not the most fair comparison here between the two radios. An external antenna would probably level the playing field a little bit, but generally speaking, for FM tuning, this one might be slightly better than this one. For the next comparison, I'm going to tune to the AM broadcast band, and I'm going to start off with WTIC 1080 out of Hartford, Connecticut. That should be about the strongest station at this location. Once again, I'll start with the 2600. Now I've also got an external antenna connected now. In this case, it's my 80 and 40 meter fan dipole that's out in the side yard. I've got it connected through a piece of coax that goes out to the antenna, and then right when it comes to the radios, I've just got a short alligator clip jumper lead to the terminal on the radio to the center conductor on the coax. So effectively this thing is acting as sort of like a random length long wire antenna at the moment. That should be sufficient for AM broadcast testing.
Better than tonight, 30 for 35. But let's talk, Mills, about the beginning of the game where you guys came out flat, and Tulane, to their credit, came out aggressively and took a 13-point lead.
Well, in scouting these guys, they play hard. They're well coached, obviously, and they really came out and they got after us. They were pushing the ball right down our throat.
So the signal sounds nice and strong. It's about halfway up on the signal meter there. Now, I'm not sure if it was translating through the microphone in the camera, but there was a little bit of interference noise coming through, again, probably from my wireless router or computer or something here in the shack. So now I'll go over to the 1150 and see what that sounds like. And before I do, I'm going to switch the external antenna from this radio over to this radio.
A lot of experience, and he's getting comfortable out there, and he's very confident.
It seems like we've talked about this a lot lately. He just continues to play extremely well, very confident on the offensive end. And the tips at the offensive glass are amazing tonight.
Well, he moves and he attacks the glass all the time. That's why he rebounds like he does. He gets rebounds out of his zone, and he's offensive rebound too. I'd like to see him, just the matchup he had tonight. He wasn't getting double teamed in the low post. Just use his speed and use his athleticism, go past a slower guy who has size, and he can be a little more.
Okay, so you could hear there a little bit of fading on the signal on this radio, but that could just be conditions and not necessarily the radio. I could also hear that sort of low frequency audio interference in the background, again probably caused by the wireless router in the background. Okay, so both radios seem to be receiving 1080 about the same strength. Again, with this one, with its somewhat better audio quality, it seemed like this one was a little easier to listen to. I've tuned around and I've found sort of a weak station coming in now on the broadcast band. I believe this is 1110 WBT out of Charlotte, North Carolina, which is not a bad haul for here in northeastern Connecticut. So once again, I'll try the 2600 first with the external antenna, and we'll see how the station is coming in.
A medical debt and just a couple little ones and twosies.
So you paid every bit of this. You didn't sell anything.
I did not sell anything.
Wow.
No.
You have lived on beans and rice, kiddo. I mean, this is a tight budget.
My goal was to hear you say you killed it.
Yeah.
So
wow.
you haven't said that in a while. But
well, you have killed it. You hit your goal.
Thank you.
This is amazing. I mean, you have worked like a maniac, but you've also just lived nothing. You haven't done anything for 2.5 years.
No. I spent a little more on fabric than maybe I should have.
Not much. You don't have much in this room. I mean, you're doing like $1,500 a month.
So a little bit of fading on the signal there, but 100% usable. Sounds real good. So I'm going to switch over to the other radio and see how it sounds over there.
My brother hates it too.
I love it. That's awesome. Bad word for people that are misbehaving. Very cool. Good for you. Very well done. What's your advice to a young single lady who looks up and feels overwhelmed with $62,000 in debt? How do you get there?
I've got the external antenna connected over to this radio, and I've got the BFO turned on. And I'm going to go up through the sideband portion of the 75/80 meter band and see if I can hear any sideband activity and tune it in on this radio.
How you doing? Okay, what car is yours going? Okay, clear. What?
Stations on this frequency are on AM. So on this radio, as you heard, I wasn't really able to pull in any stations real well. There were a couple there I was able to kind of drag in and tune around, but it seemed like there's a real high sort of a noise floor, and the stations weren't really coming over that noise floor. Some of that noise is internal to the house, and some of it was just plain old white noise, and just didn't seem like I was able to really pull the stations in all that well. If I sat here and fiddled with it a little more and went back and forth through the band, I'd probably find something usable. But I'm sort of running out of time here, so I'm going to switch over to the other radio and see how that works. So I've got the external antenna connected over here, BFO is on, and I'm around 3.6 megahertz. I'm going to start tuning up and see what I can hear.
decide to take your tower down, you put a lot of time and effort into that. And the bands will come back, you know, the old crowd. I don't run into a lot of them very often anymore. I probably talk to Scott a couple times a week. And I think I've talked to Jeremy probably 2 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I talked to him once from up at the cabin. And sometimes missing, but I can't say that you're the stuff of it, but I mean, she seems to be, her spirit seems to be pretty good.
Okay, well, it seemed like I was able to hear a few more stations on this radio and kind of dial them in. It seemed like the noise floor was less on this radio. There wasn't as much noise for the stations to overcome, so I was able to hear more of them. And using this fine-tuning knob, which is, you know, larger in diameter than either of these two, I was able to kind of bring in the frequency a little bit easier on this because I could turn this a little slower, just simply because it's got a larger diameter. However, once I did get the station in, you may have been able to hear that it was a little bit warbly. You know, unless I was exactly on it, and even when I was kind of completely exactly on it, the audio had some artifacts on it. So I don't know if this radio needs a little bit of an alignment, or something's a little bit out of spec because the radio is, you know, it is pretty old, so that could be. Or that could just be the way that it works. And, you know, that may be just the best it can do, even, you know, when it was new. So when I was able to get a station on this one, I was able to tune it in, and it sounded a little bit better in terms of not having any artifacts on the audio. But this one seemed like it was able to pull in more stations for whatever reason. So kind of an interesting kind of thing to compare there. So I'd like to keep going with this a little bit, but the video is probably getting quite lengthy at this point, and it's getting kind of late right now, so I've kind of run out of time for this evening. But maybe I'll do another video at some point in the future and go through these a little bit more in depth, or maybe with a little bit more controlled sort of environment, and see what happens. So anyhow, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to subscribe or leave a comment, feel free to do that as well. Thanks for watching.